Hey guys, this is Nick Bratton of Bratton Sports Performance. Today we're going to go over a crossover step. Now, the crossover step is one of those movements that likes to be talked about. A lot of coaches like to discuss whether it should be taught, it shouldn't be taught, whether you should use it, you shouldn't use it. My philosophy here is I want to teach you as much as I can, and I want to give you as many opportunities as I can. I tell my athletes that each of these movements that we go through is like a tool within a toolbox. I'm going to give you all the tools, but they have to figure out what they want to use in the moment when they're in that competition. So, for the crossover step, when we get set up here, this is another one of those tools similar to our directional step where we are going to work starting facing one direction but accelerate out to one of the sides. So when we set up for this, at this point our athletes have already been through our basic acceleration drills as far as our tall falling starts, our staggered starts, our single leg starts, our top down kneeling starts. By the way, if any of those are something that you're unaware of or you haven't heard that terminology, please feel free to go back through our videos and see some of those from before. But our athletes have been through those drills before. So from a linear acceleration point, we should be in a pretty good position. So as we incorporate this drill where we're working from a lateral position, that context is already there for the sprint. So when it comes to the crossover step, when we set up, very similar to our directional step, I'm going to put our athletes on a line. Now, I think this is important because it helps them to see how far they're actually driving out with each step, or if they're just staying in one place and really moving their feet in that place. I want them to be able to see whether they're actually creating a force or just moving within that position. So, I'll set up with one foot on the line. For all intensive purposes with this video, I'm going to be moving out to my right side. So every time I go through this, I'm talking about it from that direction of a sprint. So I'm going to set up with my feet right about hip or shoulder width apart. Remember, I don't want to go any further than that because it limits my ability to create force and to actually stride out in that direction. So when we teach this, we'll set up in that athletic position. Feet are underneath the hips or the shoulders. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to have our athletes lean forward. All this does is it creates a positive shin angle or a shin angle that is pointed in the direction that I want to move. And so it gets our momentum moving in that direction. I'll create that positive shin angle, that forward lean. From here, we're going to talk about pushing off of our inside foot and driving our outside knee across our body. Now, when we drive that knee across our body, we want to maintain that positive shin angle the entire time. One thing that I don't want to see is for that knee to come up across the body and then we step out and we create that negative shin angle or that braking force before we go into our first step. So, I'll set up, right foot on the line, hips down, create that lean. From here, I'm just going to drive that outside leg up and across the body, back down into the ground before I accelerate out. So I'll give you an example in real time here. Hips down, forward lean, push. Now, one thing that's important to note about the hip position with this is when I go to take off, I'm going to maintain a posture that is facing this same direction until that back foot makes contact with the ground. The back foot is the driving force for the rotation of the hips and the torso. I do not want to push off of my front leg and rotate into that first step. My sole focus with that front drive is just to be able to create some movement in that direction, not to create the rotation. So I'm going to go through this again. Feet are about hip, shoulder width apart, hips are down, lean forward, push. Now, as I talked about before, all of our athletes are very aware of our acceleration parameters before we move to this drill. So talking about things like getting into a forward angle, eyes being on the ground, maintaining good arm movement, keeping the foot pulled back under the thigh as we accelerate out. And so those are things that we're not typically as worried about or concerned about. Now, if we do see an issue within those, we will regress back to those speed drills before moving on. But those are things that we have addressed before moving on to this drill. So we'll go through our crossover step a number of times out each direction. Then we'll begin to add some reactivity to it. So having our athletes start in a neutral position, calling out one side or the other, and them having to react to that verbal cue that they hear. We'll also add some agility movements prior to it. So say a shuffle into a crossover step and sprint. So again, trying to help them put some of these movements together, get comfortable with them, not with the intent of them relying solely on the movement, but again, having that tool within their toolbox. So, in your next agility session, use this with your athletes. Take them through a few of these drills. Experiment on yourself. If you guys have any questions, as always, please feel free to contact me.